The heavy tires of the lead cruiser crushed the manicured edges of my lawn, the rhythmic pulse of emergency lights bleeding red and blue into my roses. It was 9:00 p.m., exactly when Linda, the HOA president, liked to strike. She stood between the patrol cars, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, her eyes fixed on my wooden fence with a predatory gleam. "Open this door right now, or we will break it down," the officer shouted. I didn't move, I didn't panic. I simply checked my watch. Most people see the law and assume they've lost. I see the law and look for the technicality that ends a career. Through the lace curtains, I watched the rookie officer, a boy whose uniform still had the sharp, hopeful creases of the academy, march toward my porch. He hammered his fist against the solid oak door with a violence that shook the frames. I waited for the third strike. Then, with the calm of a man who has spent 30 years in a courtroom, I opened the door. In my right hand, I held my smartphone. The screen was tilted up, capturing the entire scene. The rookie froze mid-swing, realizing he wasn't looking at a terrified senior citizen, but at a live video transmission. On the display, a man with silver hair and a face etched in the lines of 1,000 legal rulings stared back with icy disdain. Sergeant Miller, the veteran officer standing by the car, took one look at the screen and felt his stomach drop into his boots. He recognized those features instantly. It was the county chief justice. "Sergeant Miller," the voice from the phone echoed across the porch, cold and amplified. The judge didn't wait for a greeting. "I was under the impression that your department required a signed warrant from my chambers before conducting an aggressive property seizure after dark." Miller's face went from pale to a ghostly gray. He knew the man in the silk robe on that screen could end his pension with a single phone call. The rookie retreated 2 steps, his hand falling away from his belt, as if the air around me had suddenly become electrified. Linda, however, was oblivious to the professional suicide unfolding. She stepped toward the porch, her heels clicking sharply on the stone. "Miller, what are you doing?" she shrieked. "The bylaws are clear. I have a board-certified emergency order." She turned her fury toward the phone in my hand. "I don't care who you have on the line, Arthur. This is a civil matter governed by the association, not a criminal trial." The silence from the judge was more terrifying than any shout. "We are leaving, Linda," Miller muttered, grabbing the rookie by the shoulder. He didn't care about drainage easements or HOA votes anymore. He cared about the Fourth Amendment violation currently being recorded by the highest legal authority in the county. The police retreat was rapid and lacked any semblance of dignity. Their cruisers reversed out of the driveway so quickly that tires kicked up a cloud of gravel. Linda stood alone on the sidewalk, her knuckles white. "You think that little stunt saves you?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "The judge only rules on criminal entry, old man. But this fence is an administrative violation. I've already spoken to the inspectors. I don't need a warrant to bring the county tractors onto common ground to clear a public threat." She roared out of the cul-de-sac, leaving me in the silence of the night. I looked down at the screen. The judge offered a single, grim nod before the call disconnected. I looked at the fence and wondered exactly what lie Linda had fed the environmental office to move them this fast. The morning sun rose with a deceptive calm. By 8:30 a.m., the silence was shattered by the low, guttural thrum of a heavy diesel engine. I carried a tray of Earl Grey to my porch, settling into my wicker chair just as Linda marched up the driveway. She wasn't alone. Flanking her were 2 men in reflective orange vests and a third man in a tailored Italian suit who stood at the curb, checking his $10,000 watch with practiced impatience. That was Marcus, the developer. Linda held a neon yellow document aloft like a flag of parley. She didn't wait for me to speak. She began reciting from the paper, her voice amplified so the neighbors, now peering from their windows, could hear every word. She claimed the county had issued a summary abatement order, citing my fence as the primary cause of localized flooding. "Leo," I said to my grandson, who stood in the doorway with white knuckles, "bring out the folding chairs for our neighbors. If the HOA intends to perform street theater, it's only fair the audience is comfortable." The neighbors drifted forward, creating a semicircle of witnesses. Linda ignored them, thrusting the yellow document toward my face. "Read it and weep, Arthur. This is a Code 302 emergency order. We don't need a judge for a public safety hazard." I didn't reach for the paper immediately. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I noticed the way the ink seemed slightly feathered at the edges. I noticed how Marcus, the developer, wouldn't meet my gaze. Finally, I took the document. I didn't look at the legal citations. I looked at the bottom of the page. A faint, knowing smile touched my mouth. "It is fascinating, Linda," I began, my voice carrying clearly, "how the county environmental office has seemingly forgotten how to spell the name of their own director in their haste to assist you. I held the paper up, pointing to a line of fine print. Beyond the linguistic failures, there is a technical oversight that renders this a farce. A genuine Code 302 requires a raised, embossed seal from the land registrar. This is a flat digital photocopy. This isn't an order, Linda. It's a creative writing project. The crowd murmured. Linda's face turned the color of a ripened beet. She looked to Marcus for help, but the developer simply looked away, pulling out his phone. I don't care about the seal, Linda shrieked, her composure finally snapping. She turned to the workmen. I am the president of this association. Get the chains, tear it down now. The workmen hesitated, but Marcus gave a sharp, imperceptible nod. The authority of a developer's peril outweighed the legal observations of a retiree. The mechanical whine of a winch began to echo, a declaration of war. I didn't move to block them. I simply sat back down. Patience, Leo, I whispered. The more energy they spend on this, the heavier the hammer falls. As the chains tightened around the primary oak post, Marcus walked closer to the porch. He saw I couldn't be bullied, so he decided to try the one thing he thought worked on everyone: greed. Mr. Vance, Marcus said, his voice oily and confidential. He leaned against the railing, unfolding a high-resolution architectural rendering. It was a $50 million luxury condominium complex slated for the woods behind my house. He tapped a specific section of the map, a wide access road designed to cut straight through the corner of my lot, exactly where my fence stood. If I don't get my heavy equipment through this corridor by Friday, I lose my financing, Marcus whispered. Move this fence 2 meters to the west and I'll give you the deed to a penthouse unit, free and clear, a $300,000 value just for a handshake. I looked at the rendering, then at the ground beneath his polished shoes. You speak of 2 meters as if it were a mere suggestion of space, I said. You see a $50 million opportunity. I see a $5 million shortcut that bypasses the basic laws of structural safety. Marcus laughed, a short, nervous sound. It's just dirt and grass, Arthur. My soil reports say it's a viable access point. You're just being stubborn. I pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from my cardigan. The modern maps you rely on were digitized by clerks who have never walked this terrain, I stated. 40 years ago, when I was the lead engineer for this county, I personally designed the boundary you are trying to erase. I stood up, walking toward the fence as the wood groaned under the winch's pressure. I didn't build this fence to keep people out, Marcus. I built it to keep the weight of the world off a secret your surveys are too shallow to find. Tear it down, Marcus roared, his mask of civility finally shattering. I'll pay the fines, just get it out of my way. The winch screamed, the oak post began to line. Linda cheered, her face twisted in vindictive joy. And then the ground spoke back. It wasn't a snap, it was a low, guttural thump that vibrated through the soles of our shoes. The winch didn't break the fence stayed rooted. Instead, the back of the flatbed truck suddenly lurched upward. A hairline fracture appeared in the asphalt of the street, racing toward the truck like a lightning bolt. Stop, I commanded, but it was too late. With a sound like a subterranean explosion, the entire section of the common ground Linda had claimed was hers gave way. The flatbed truck slid sideways, its rear wheels hovering over a gaping black maw that had opened in the earth. The workmen scrambled back, screaming. Linda fell to her knees as the sidewalk beneath her began to tilt. Marcus stood frozen, his $50 million rendering fluttering into the abyss. What is that? Linda gasped, her voice trembling. That, I said, stepping to the very edge of the collapse, is the primary regional storm vault. It was decommissioned in the 70s because the limestone ceiling was unstable. It's why this land was designated as a non-buildable green buffer 40 years ago. My fence wasn't just a boundary, Marcus. The posts are anchored into the only stable granite shelf in this entire cul-de-sac. They were the only thing keeping the vibration of your machinery from collapsing the vault. I looked at the developer, whose face was now the color of ash. You wanted an access road. You just found one. It leads 40 feet straight down into the county sewer system. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Marcus's phone hitting the pavement. He knew it was over. The environmental impact alone would tie up his project for a decade. The lawsuits from the city for destroying a primary vault would bankrupt him. And Linda, she was looking at the summary abatement order in her hand. By signing that forged document, she had assumed personal liability for the emergency action. She hadn't just lost the fight, she had handed me the keys to her house. I took a final sip of my tea, the porcelain clinking gently against the saucer. I believe you mentioned something about paying for the damages, Marcus, I asked, my voice calm and observant. I'd start with the truck, and Linda, I'd start looking for a good lawyer. I hear the Chief Justice is particularly fond of people who respect the law. I turned and walked back into my house, closing the oak door behind me. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was finally quiet. Since you've seen how a single fence can hold up a $50 million empire, would you like me to tell you about the time the HOA tried to lien my house over a non-standard mailbox, only to find out I owned the land the clubhouse sat on?